we are all heavy user consumer of AI, and there are chances that we have our own either imagination or view how it's been used, but in reality, there is a massive gap between AI narrative that we hear often and the reality. We are drowning in predictions, but we really get to see what developers are actually building in production. I mean, here we are in lucky spot. We talk to a lot of folks. We do know what they're using, how they're using it, what are the challenges that they're facing, and how they're being solved. And on top of that, Runpod just released their State of AI report analyzing ground level workload data across 183 countries to show exactly what's happening. And today we have with us Brennen Smith, CTO at Runpod, to walk us through that. First of all, Brendan, it's great to have you on the show.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate your time today.
No, it's my pleasure. Before we talk about this report, I would love to know a bit about Runpod and what do you folks do?
Runpod's one of the leading, you might call us neo clouds or AI clouds. We're one of the companies that's come up, and our focus is really on building the best AI experience for developers. So, this ranges from our pods products all the way out to production level inference. And what we're able to do is we've built many custom engines inside that allow us to scale AI workloads from a small single GPU all the way out to thousands of GPUs around the globe. We have many customers ranging from, small hobbyists and education facilities. We work very closely with, say, Stanford, Berkeley, etc. But then as well, we work with many large companies. A good example of this is Zillow. A lot of their virtual staging that you see on their website, that's run through Runpod. There's many different companies who use this, but overall, what we focus on is providing high quality AI compute for all of the cutting edge research around the globe.
Excellent. Thank you. And let's now talk about this report that you folks came out with. Before we talk about some of the findings, let's also try to understand the idea behind this report.
This is something that we get asked about every single day is, well, how are people taking AI to production? Businesses are wondering what exactly is the kind of status quo? How are their competitors or how are others, what is the benchmark in the industry? And then as well, researchers want to know, what is the cutting edge? What are the models that are performing best? And actually, by performing, I'm not saying necessarily the actual, model performance itself, but market adoption. So what we realized is that we kept getting these questions. There's not that many companies in the world who can answer this. Most can talk at a high level, but very few are actually running these types of workloads. So we decided, to be able to help the industry at large to put this report together. We have an in-house data team. They're incredibly good, team of PhDs and data scientists. They went through our data in aggregate, analyzed it, and found some, frankly, really exciting insights that a lot of the members of the press have found interesting. And, we plan on doing this on a semi-annual basis every 6 months. And that's what I'm really excited about is, this now sets kind of the line, what's the changes over time? That's when things are going to get really exciting.
So true. Thank you. Now, when I was reading the blog post, the headline of your report is that the market in reality looks nothing like the narrative that we hear. Talk a bit about what does your ground level data actually tell us about how. Let's focus on open source model ecosystem is evolving right now.
It all depends. Let's talk about the different, areas of modality. So we have for image models, Stable Diffusion remains, one of the preeminent models that's being selected. Flux is definitely up and coming. It's emerged as a challenger. But even still, I think people still get good results out of Stable Diffusion, and the tooling is much more proven, stable, etc. So still Stable Diffusion remains king. But I do expect that Flux will start moving higher and higher up the stack. And frankly, I would not be surprised if someday it takes it over. It's a similar story with video generation, except, WAN is ultimately the primary driver. That's the gold standard. That's a reference. I don't expect it necessarily to change. There might be something new that comes up, but at this point in time, WAN is by far the strongest one. Now we'll see with long term, will the investment continue? With recent announcements, the state of investment in that space may change. So I would see that as maybe an opportunity for someone or a new entity to come in and put something together. But for now, WAN remains the most popular one on our platform. Text to speech is actually a really fascinating one. We actually see that quite a bit, especially in the Middle East. We find that as a very popular use case. We have a data center in the UAE, the Emirates, and that the primary workload that's being operated there is text to speech models. So XCTDS is the primary model of choice. And then what we have found is that many of these are either A, translation services, or B, I think Dubai is a hub for innovation. It is absolutely an area where a lot of tech, companies prior to the conflict were centralized around. They are building, call center type apps, different, areas that involve the communication side. So XCTS is still by far, the most common one we see. And finally, let's get to LLMs, the ones that we all love and, appreciate. Qwen is the most popular one. Like that was a really interesting one for us is, we assume that, Llama 3.1 would probably be the most popular one. No, our top one is Qwen. Now, since this report has come out, I've personally seen in our data like Kimi KV 2.5, like that is also going up rapidly. So I expect that to be on the leaderboards next time we release this report. That's been an interesting one because, especially with the revelation that Cursor was heavily reliant on that model, I've received a lot of requests from like CIOs, CTOs who are looking to reduce their token cost. And they realize that they are maybe able to get, say, 80% of the goodness of Cursor at a fraction of the cost. Or they're able to take that model, fine tune it themselves, and actually get a better outcome because it has better context on that specific company and entity. So, if there's one that I'm really excited about and I'm, timing didn't line up on the report, Kimi is one that I think would be really exciting to track for the long-term future. So it all depends on the modality. Each area is different. Each area of open source models has its strengths and weaknesses. But overall, I think the most important detail to take away is that these are being used in production. These are serving millions of requests every single day. They are load bearing for actual business workloads. I think if there's anything exciting to take away from this is everyone's been talking about like, how soon will it be till actually money is being made off of AI? And for a lot of companies, that answer was, quite a while ago. I think we're well past like the innovation stage. People should be able to be monetizing these at this point.
Perfect. And you only track open source up to, there are like closed source models, very popular one, cloud and all those things are. What is the gap? How far behind open weights are versus, let's say, Qwen versus Sonnet or Opus or Gemini or Grok or ChatGPT?
I would look at it in terms of what is the overall outcome that you're trying to achieve. So for many of those, like just let's say Opus 4.5, for many business cases, it is too heavy for the needs of the entity. Like say, for example, speed, time to first token velocity is incredibly important. You don't need a tool like that. You might be able to get away with a much lighter model and do some fine tuning on top of it to be able to get your time to first token down to say like call center needs. So I wouldn't necessarily look at it as in terms of like brute force capability. Where we see people doing actually some really interesting things is blending them together. We do have the ability at Runpod to use both closed source and open source models. Obviously, closed source running separate infrastructure. But what they're doing is they're doing kind of like dual context basis. So they'll pull in information from, say, the closed source model. They'll use it to synthesize a high level response, or they'll use it to synthesize what exactly user intent is. They then are feeding it into a fine-tuned model that's running on Runpod. So that's where I don't necessarily see as like everyone's looking at like, okay, what's like the silver bullet model? What is the best model for me to use? And in reality, the most successful companies that we're seeing are actually they're building their own model routing architectures, and they're building AI intelligence into that model routing architecture. And then as well, fanning out to a number of different models, each that are tuned to whatever the particular context or case might be. So, I wouldn't say like it's a one size fits all. It really comes down to like the clever players here, they're using many, many different flavors of models.
And is it that most enterprises, when it comes to open weight model, they are running it themselves because infrastructure costs can be very, very high, GPUs availability is also, or they are using it via, of course, APIs. There are so many providers in this space. OpenRouter is one of them. What does that market look like? Open weights are there, but how enterprises are using them?
Yeah, so that comes down to where do you want to do the orchestration? Where do you put your special secret sauce? In every business, you have to decide where do you want to invest? Where do you put your team's calories? Where do you invest your dollars? It really depends. Some companies are going the true just API only route. I have a model that's hosted somewhere and I'm just going to call against it and I'm going to get outputs and responses. That's fine. What we are seeing though is, especially we see this in like our instant clusters product. So it's much more larger, 1,000 GPU clusters, is companies are actually fine tuning these models. And that's where what they're looking for is the ability to be able to bring in their business context. So I wouldn't necessarily say they're at odds with each other. Many people pick Runpod because it gives that flexibility. Some are doing actually their own custom VLLM tweaks. They're bringing in their own inference engines. They have things that are very cleverly designed on their side. The other side as well is many of them already have systems that are running internally. And being able to lift and shift is more straightforward, or being able to do dev and test local, ship to same, stack in production. There's many different ways. I wouldn't say like one is going to be the winner or the other. You think about AWS, for example, you have AWS offers everything from like technically bare metal via EC2 all the way to completely abstracted APIs. It's the ability to offer all of them. Like that's actually where I see the most value is rather than a prescriptive approach, is giving businesses the right tools that they need to decide where they sit on the spectrum. And of course, we'll be happy to help them move up or down that spectrum as they need.
Let's go back to the report. Was there anything, any finding in this state of AI report that surprised you or your own team where you're like, oh, we were not expecting this? If there was anything like that, what was that?
I think the biggest one, and for anyone who read this report in time, you could have made a lot of money, is B200s. So if you rewind back, B200s were coming online in like June, May last year. If you look at their utilization profiles, it was not great. They were sitting very cold. Contract prices were extremely low. And it was just, frankly, everyone was really concerned about like, would they be getting a return on investment? We saw in our data that all of a sudden demand was skyrocketing upwards. It was due to a number of factors. There was software compatibility issues that were fixed. There was a couple key firmware patches that NVIDIA released. And then finally, people were able to see on Blackwell, time to first token is like 10 times faster than Hopper. For 10, that's a material difference for the human, like the human mind. Anything that's 100 milliseconds or less is, roughly speaking, instantaneous to the human eye. And Hopper was not able to achieve that for TTFT. Blackwell is. And that was, I think, you unlock those three capabilities, demand skyrocketed up. So we were able to leverage that and, secure and hedge quite a few bets in terms of getting B200 capacity online quickly. But that is one where that was the biggest surprise for us because everyone was saying like, nope, Blackwell is cold, B200s are not in demand right now. But then we saw on the day, I was like, nope, it is absolutely moving up. And there's a couple key reasons why.
Looking at your own user base, what are a few things that you wish, based on this report, that these users, these developers will understand, and then you're like, suddenly they will be able to get much more advantage out of these AIs than they are doing now?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, you touched on the first point in terms of, I think let's talk about layers of the cake here. There's a lot of different aspects on this. And, I'll actually say like we recently, we passed 500,000 developers. We're actually flirting with 750,000 developers on the platform. So our marketing team, our growth team, hats off to them. They're an incredible group. I hope to be able to keep up with them. So, what we see though is, there's a couple different layers of this. In my mind, the most important thing, I'm sure, everyone knows the infamous, Steve Ballmer developer speech. The entire phrase was developers. In my mind is every single day I ask, like, what can we do to make the developer experience better? What can we do to make it easier for developers to get online? And what can we do to make it so they're able to innovate faster? Pace of innovation, I think, is going to be the primary gating factor right now. Where, anytime you're in an industrial type revolution, that's the first area of the curve is who can innovate fastest, who can gain edge there. There will be a certain point where now you need to get to the efficiency side of the hump, where innovation is starting to plateau in terms of squeezing edge. Now we have to squeeze out edge via efficiency. We're not there yet. We have plenty of time. So that's where focusing right now on how to make the developer experience better. We've released a bunch of different tools. We have a bunch of different SDKs that help enable that. And it's been working. We're the number one, reference NeoCloud AI cloud on GitHub. Out of all of them, like open source developers pick Runpod. So where I'm going with this is right now we're seeing a tectonic shift of humans writing code to agents writing code. And I think what, is probably going to be a central theme in our next report, and would love feedback, from anyone who wants to give advice or guidance or curiosity, is we are seeing a major uptick in the amount of agent-driven usage on Runpod. So that's one where, I've had the team actually invest very heavily in like make Runpod the best place for agents to operate. It's a weird one. How do you market to a LLM itself? So I think what I would look at from a developer's perspective, like as your question asked, is as you yourself are building tools, and also as you're setting up your own developer toolkit, your tool chains, etc., is think about how to actually make agents actually flow together with the larger ecosystem. It's not so much anymore like, okay, I'm going to have it bang out some code and run it. It's no, like, how do you actually have it start operating your stack? At Runpod, a large portion of our production stack is operated by an agent we call supply agent. That allows us to punch way above our weight in terms of humans needed for on-call operations. So that's what I would, really recommend thinking about is, taking a bit of a holistic perspective of, okay, like how do you leverage these agentic tools, not just to bang out code, not just to run things, but actually as part of the ecosystem. Those who figure that out, they are set for great success.
One thing that we hear, I was in Europe last month, and one thing that when I was having discussion there is regulations, they play a very big role in kind of stifling or slowing down innovation as well. The problem with the AI is that, you folks are at the edge of what is happening. No offenses, it could be off the camera. Our lawmakers have barely the clue of what the laws are. Okay, they don't have basic understanding of how things work. And now they are trying to regulate AI. I am all for regulation. I can pick anything from the in Europe it's much better. You can just pick anything from the store. You can drink it. It's safe. So yes, I can get in the plane. I know it's safe. I can get in a car. I know it will take me from A to B. So yes, I do like regulations, but sometimes over-regulation without understanding the industry will harm and hurt a lot of things. In general, if I ask you, where do you see things are heading in terms of course, hardware? The cost is, if you remember x86, it kind of democratized. Otherwise, before that, if you look at the mainframe, people cannot even use those, supercomputers, then ARM came and slowly, then cloud came, Akamai, Linode happened. So things are getting, open source has democratized the whole, you don't have to pay licenses for all the operating system. You don't have to pay license for Java anymore. You can have, so a lot of open source technologies are democratizing. This is just a big, my monologue as a background because I get frustrated in this space sometimes. If I ask you in general, when it comes to all the layers of AI, because you folks work in there, of course, hardware layer is there, inferencing, their frameworks or their models are there. Where do you see things are heading, or where do you see will be the ideal model where just the way http and the internet, it doesn't matter which website it is. Right now we are also dealing with a lot of fragmentation happening. Models don't talk to each other, everybody. So what would be the ideal situation for developers, that they log into Runpod, and just like you log into email and you do whatever you want, you log into a website or a browser, you do whatever. What would be the ideal situation for AI?
Whew, you covered a lot of good topics there. Let's start from the top. Okay, so here's what I would blend together is let's start with the geopolitical side. It's the fun one, it's the spicy one. I am with you in terms of regulation is required. Like realistically, if without regulation, civilization does not function. Like there has to be a certain level of regulation. I think, and I'm not going to comment specifically on the EU or Asia Pacific, but what I will say is what I have been impressed about is some countries are leaning into innovation in regulation. Like there's two ways to do it, which is one, you try to slow things down, you try to gatekeep, you try to control. The other option is that you, in the regulation itself, are innovative in how you regulate a new emerging change, a new emerging opportunity. Those ones who are aligning organizations and government organizations around positive outcomes, but driving the positive outcomes will have a much better result than those who try to gatekeep and guard. AI is here. We're not going to stop that tidal wave. It's going to happen. So I think it's now the matter of making sure that regulations are there as kind of guardrails and bumpers rather than roadblocks. The second part, feeding into that, obviously, like there's the hardware embargoes. Like hardware embargoes, in one hand, like yes, they cause a temporary delay, but I would, if there's any company I would never bet against, it is Huawei. And there's a number of companies in China who are incredibly good, that have the capability to take this on. They have the mental power, they have the capital, and they have the ability to do vertical integration that's unmatched. So what I would say is those regulations, frankly, are forcing ingenuity. It's actually kind of fascinating to follow what's happening there. But even without the regulations, you run into that with economics. Amazon, they purchased Annapurna Labs. Annapurna Labs is an incredibly talented team. At least in Israel at the time, I don't know where they're located now. Apple, obviously, they have their program of deploying Apple Silicon within data centers in the edge, and they're protected. I think it's Apple Private Confidential Compute. GCP has their own system, and what you see is there's constraints bring ingenuity, I guess is my point. Is when you have unlimited constraints, you end up actually kind of in the world of x86 and the era of Pentium 4 of Prescott, where things were very inefficient. You just were able to throw more cores at it, or more threads, technically hyper-threading, and just burn more wattage. What that meant was that then AMD was able to swoop in and come in and bring a better product to market. Now, I'm not going to say that NVIDIA is sitting on their laurels. They're absolutely moving fast. They are the cutting edge. They are doing some incredible things. But they're being pushed by all of these different labs across the world. I think that's the most fun part about this industry is the competition. No one is sitting on the sidelines. No one is sitting still. Globally, geopolitically, no one is sitting still. So you can tie, approaches of regulation all the way to chip design, all the way out to, how that impacts software. So what I'd recommend to either policymakers and or software engineers, kind of a diverse group of people, is be flexible. What's true today will not be true tomorrow. And that's, you can zoom in macro, the GPUs that are available because supply shortages, it's very difficult to predict. It is a battle. I have to fight every single day to get additional capacity, and we're pretty dang good at it. But there's times where certain chips are available, certain aren't. Production runs open and they close. So being able to be flexible with your architecture of software, or on the policymakers, being flexible in how you're designing your regulation that will create the best outcomes. So I think that's the exciting part about this industry, but that's also the hardest part. To your point is like it's fragmented, but with fragmentation means opportunity. So for, taking back to Runpod, what I see it as is enormous opportunity for us to build the best tools for our customers. And it's semantics, like everyone says that. But what I mean by that is we have the flexibility and the privilege. We support AMD. I'm good. I have good connections with the leadership team at Qualcomm. We have connections with Cerebras, deep connections there. So, we'll always keep our North Star on building the best developer tool for engineers, developers, and business. Who knows what accelerators that might bring?
No, so very well said, and thank you for actually taking that question. It was a very complicated question, but you dealt in a very good manner. So thank you for that. Now, if we just look at once again, Runpod, you did talk about which models are more popular, emerging model. Uh, can you talk about where, not from the technology point of view, but from the usage point of view, because you also have a lot of data from developers, where are things heading? What kind of forecasts you have? I mean, we are talking about, of course, vibe coding has become an old thing, but now security, I cover security a lot. They're talking vibe hunting nowadays, using AI for all those things. And open source folks, earlier, I cover open source heavily, used to complain that they are not getting enough patches, and now they are getting overwhelmed that there are so many patches that they're shutting down the shop. We cannot handle that. So what kind of forecast that you have for the next couple of months where you're saying this is where things are heading?
I think the most telling statement of all that whole question was that you asked me to forecast the next couple months. Normally in this scenario, you'd be asking me, okay, what's the next couple of years look like? In our industry, we talk in months and quarters. So I think if that tells anything, is it's happening so fast. This is one where I get asked this question, and again, it gets a little bit back to flexibility. Is like what we see over and over. DeepSeek was a watershed moment for Runpod. We had look, like the board always asked me like forecast, plan, project, etc. I can't plan for DeepSeek moments. They happen, and they are becoming more and more common every single day. So what I foresee happening is a greater convergence. Is I guess what I'd say is like, it's to your point of fragmentation. Like we start seeing a little bit more reduction of fragmentation. Like capability that's sitting over here and capability that's sitting over here start to get brought closer and closer. So what I'd actually say is there's going to be two layers of innovation. The first one is actually in the models themselves and the capabilities of them, and those will continue to kind of increment better. But if OpenClaw proved anything, it's actually some of the biggest greenfield blue ocean area is the tooling and the glue. How you bring these models together is getting to the point, like the models are good enough, like how you bring them together is now the most important thing. So to your point, like vibe hunting, guaranteed someone's going to come up with a new standard tool. Like curl was, the obvious example, like of patches going from a desert to too much. But they were also a classic example. They were early to market. They built a great tool. They became the foundation, frankly, of all communication on the internet. I could see that happening with AI as well, as like just like OpenClaw. Like there are going to be these foundational glue tools, no AI in them, but or like they themselves are not AI, but they are the orchestrator of AI tools and agents. And I think how do you blend that really well together? The other one that I'm really excited about is small AI. And this is one that, we've been using a little bit internally. You think about like large AI, LLMs, I have a complicated problem I'm going to throw at it. And it's going to synthesize and give me back the best answer. But something that I also looked at in previous roles is like how do you use small AI models to make small decisions? Small decisions are still just as important. You might be having to make 1,000 of them an hour or a second in certain cases with an infrastructure. How do you leverage AI in that way? It could be on a CPU, could be on a small GPU, could be on a sidecar accelerator. Like there's a lot of ways to do it, but using that as part of the normal flow of code is what I'm getting at. is just like a ternary or a Boolean, a small call out to a small LLM. And that's one that I'm personally really excited about, is because you can time these small models against these big mega models. You can do some really cool things. So, we use that for like traffic routing and management. But that's also where that's just one idea, and that's an obvious one. So I think, again, the glue code, the frameworks, how things are brought together, like that's going to be the really cool thing for the next 2Q.
Of course, AI is exciting. People may not understand it, but it is almost like magic. You spread some pixel dust and it does things magically. When you compare what people say they are building with uh, as compared to what they're deploying. I talk to a lot of folks. They get all the latest NVIDIA's hardware to build things. But 6 months later, when I ask them, "What did you build?" We are playing with it. It's so what I'm trying to understand is what is the biggest gap that you see where hey, this is what we want to do versus look, we have already deployed it. Going back to ROI, one of my friends was asking, hey, you have been using so much AI, how much impact it has on your business. 3 months earlier I could not answer, but today I can answer. So what I'm trying to understand is that excitement versus actual production. What are you seeing? What developers are actually doing, deploying?
Yeah, there's a mentor of mine said a long time ago, like money can't buy brilliance. And we're seeing that to a huge extent now, where the best success that people are having, I think one of the parts I love most about AI is you no longer need to be a software engineer to get an exceptional technical outcome. In a weird way, like AI is democratizing. It's one of the most democratizing forces in the world. And the reason why I think that is so important is, there was always a classic, view of like, to build a successful business, you need like, the hacker, the hipster, the hustler. Like you have to have all three. Well, AI now covers the hacker and the hipster. You can do design in AI. You can do, the code in AI. What it really is now putting forward is the human spirit. Like how much drive do you have and how much of an idea do you have? To your exact point, like I could, like someone given a cluster, a huge cluster of B200s or Vera Rubins, they get early access, like whatever, does not mean a good outcome anymore. So that's where, it's terrifying, I think, in many ways, because no longer like it's now a challenge of the mind. Like the human mind and the idea making and frankly, the grit and perseverance to make it happen. There was I can't remember the exact company name, but it was an individual, I think it's him and his brother, who created like a $200 million run rate Ozempic company. Just him. And a suite of AI tools that he brought in. Like, that's a perfect example of like the human mind being unlocked by AI. So every time everyone says like, okay, like AI is going to destroy civilization, going to destroy humanity, like it's a pretty strong, pitch. What I would actually say is it unlocks humanity. And it makes it so that we are now able to unconstrain like the goals and ideas that we've had for so long. So like, I Serve the Home, Patrick Kennedy wrote a fascinating piece on the use of AI in, I think it was like a hardware store. Very generic, like brick and mortar retail, but it talked about like using it for, basic shoplifting detection, using it for like popularity analysis, like where do people dwell within the store? How do they do store layouts? How do they do all sorts of things? And it was helping a small mom and pop store get better revenue and margins. So again, like there's a lot of things to, like doom and gloom in the industry, and I think that's just the wrong approach. I think what people need to see it as is, look, like I can now do things I've always wanted to, but have never been able to. Sky's the limit. What do you do with it? What do you harness it for? That's the best part about AI. And that's frankly what, at Runpod, I love to see and support every single day is those developers or non-developers, frankly, who are pushing the limits and building things that, frankly, I had no idea and I love.
Brennen, thank you so much for joining me and for a really great discussion which went beyond just technology, but also where things are heading, how developers are actually using it, and without using any sugarcoating, the raw reality. So thank you for all those great insights, and I would love to have you back on the show. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me today. It was a fun conversation. You threw some good chat questions my way. Let's make it happen again.